All right, guys, here we go. When last we left, we had gone through having a function execute when we click this image here. And in terms of the requirements for the project, we still have to cover conditional statements, methods, and the document object model. So the conditional statement, of course, is going to be, if something happens, then do that. And so there's a lot of different ways to use that. We of course like to incorporate math.random into our rock paper scissors, right? So it's kind of a fun one to use when we are looking at whether or not the attack is successful or not. So we have this attack function which runs this here, but what we could do is we can write a function to give us a value of a random dice roll as an example. So we can use that to create some some randomness in our game. So we're going to create a dice roll function here, and I'm just going to do the kind of standard shorthand function declaration and call it dice roll. Only this time I'm going to put a parameter in it, and I'm going to use a parameter called sides, which is going to be the number of sides on the dice that we're rolling. So if we have a 6-sided die, you've got a 1 in 6 chance of getting any one of those sides. So I'm going to put a localized variable called outcome in here, and that outcome is going to equal math.floor math.random, and don't forget my parentheses there, and then I'm going to multiply that by the number of sides. Now by itself, outcome depending on sides is going to, this dice roll is going to give us a value back. So what I'm going to wind up doing is returning a value into this function, and I'm going to return outcome, which is going to give us that random outcome here. So outcome is inside this function. It's going to return outcome, which means this whole function, when I use it, is going to take on a value of this right here. And so math.floor, of course, takes off all decimal values. So if I had 1.9, it would make it 1. If I had 2.75, it would make it 2. If I had 3.15439, it would make it 3. And I wrap that around here math.random, which of course is 0 to 0.999, times the number of sides. So if the number of sides is 3, if we had a 3-sided die, I don't know what that looks like, but so we'll take a 6. So if we had 6, math.random times 6, if it's 0.5, that would be 3, and it'll roll it down or floor it down to 3 if it was another number. But the problem here is you could have 0. So if the outcome for math.random happens to be 0 times the number of sides, no matter what the number of sides are, you could have 0. So if the sides were 6, it could be 0, and it will never actually be 6. So what I wind up doing here is adding a +1 to that, so that if the outcome is 0, it becomes 1. If the outcome is 1, it becomes 2. If the outcome is 3, it becomes 4, and so on, all the way up to 6, and no higher than 6. So because the highest it does, it can take on in terms of value here, or I should say here, would be 5. So it'd be 0 to 5. So I have to add 1 onto that. So now if I use a 6-sided die, if I was playing Yahtzee or something, I would have several of those. I can use this function to return that value. Now before I return things, because return is the last thing that I do in a function, I'm going to return that outcome, which means anytime I use dice roll 6 or dice roll 20, it's going to give me the value of a random number between 1 and whatever the number of sides is. So yeah, what I would want to do here is actually console log that outcome, just because I like to be able to see every time I use it what I got. And you could even incorporate something like a Yahtzee game where you play Yahtzee and you could use the document object model, which we'll get to next, and actually have this spit out onto onto the screen somewhere on your HTML document. Okay, so now I have this dice roll function. So I have this very useful function that gives me a random outcome. Let's use it. Down here in attack, I want there to be a chance for this to happen. So I'm going to say if, and then I have to have it evaluate something. So I could say if dice roll, and then I'm going to say this is a 20-sided die. So I could say if that is greater than 10, then do something, right? So that's a conditional statement. And what it'll do is, of course, attack. So you have a chance to use your speed here, I guess is one way to look at it. Otherwise, just do battle once, which means you either get a single attack or you get an attack related to your speed, if you can see what I mean there, because this will run a loop as many times as you have speed. But otherwise, if dice roll happens to be less than 10, less than or equal to 10, then it will just battle. And of course, battle's up here, console log monster.health equals monster.health minus hero attack. Now, if I really wanted to make this interesting, in terms of the console log, I could, say you attack the monster for X amount or whatever, and then, roll out its hit points that way. But I don't really need that yet. Right now, as it stands, I now have my conditional statement, which we'll go ahead and put our conditional statement. And so this is a conditional statement, an if-else statement. You can also have else-if. So if I were to do else if dice roll. Now, what's interesting about this, if I do it this way, it actually won't work. And the reason it won't work is because even if I were to use these same values, every time I use dice roll, it generates a new value. Meaning every time I write this, it's going to randomly create a new value between 1 and 20. So this will evaluate to true or false, and that will have nothing to do with what the dice roll is down here. So if I wanted to use it multiple times in here, I would actually do var, and then I could do roll equals dice roll 20. And then I could say if roll is greater than 10, then do something. So roll is there, and I don't need that extra parenthesis, so let's get that out of there. So every time this function runs, it's going to set roll to a random value, and then it's going to evaluate if roll is greater than 10. I can also say if roll, else if roll is less than 3, alert, you missed. Okay, of course we don't want to use alerts a lot, but you have a small chance of getting that alert, and of course we would want to use the document object model, which we will here in a minute. But for now, we've got a chance of getting an alert. It's a small chance, but it's a chance nonetheless. So we've got if roll is greater than 10, do battle based on the speed. If roll is less than 3, you missed. Otherwise, just do regular old battle. Those are the 3 potential outcomes. So you've also set up a variable that is local to this function. Okay, this roll is not outside here. It's not a global variable like potion level. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that stuff. We set it up here so that every time the function runs, roll becomes new, which we would want. And it's a new roll of dice roll 20. And so that's a conditional statement here. Let me go ahead and move this for you guys. And then a loop, and that'll do it. So let's go ahead and test our code. In all likelihood, it's probably got a bug. We'll find out. So make sure to save, which I did, and then let's refresh. And if I click, we've got 14, and then it did the multi-attack. Now his speed is awfully high, so this guy's not going to last very long like this. But if I roll again, you can see I got pretty lucky there. Let's go ahead and move his speed down to 2 just to make it interesting, which of course, as you know, is going to evaluate if the roll is greater than 10, then I've got a 50-50 shot at having the multi-attack. So there's that. So let's go ahead and try that again now that we're saved. We'll refresh and we'll attack. And then I rolled an 18, I rolled a 19, I rolled a 3, which I almost missed there, and so on. So now it just comes down to game balance. And I would have to write a conditional statement that says, oh, there I go, I missed. And if I keep going, I'll miss again eventually. There we go. And so that is not a totally inappropriate use of an alert. Alerts aren't fun, but sometimes if they're fairly infrequent and it's something that's important, like you didn't hit the target, in this case, that's not too bad. So, so there you go. So there's a conditional statement. So we've cleared that one off.